Hey, and welcome to our channel. Today we're gonna knit a purl knitted sweater. Remember to subscribe to the channel and get more free knitting patterns. In the top box you can see how many stitches you need to cast to make the size you want to knit. We're gonna start with knitting our rib edge, which is 1 knit, 1 purl, and we're gonna do that for 12 rows. We've now done the rib edge and going to do the purl knitting. Purl knitting is opposite on each row. So you do 1 purl, 1 knit, and then the next row you do the opposite. So note what stitch you're stitching on. This is a purl, this is a knit. So you're going to do a purl here and a knit, which is the opposite, and then you're going to do a purl and then a knit. Next row you're going to do the opposite again, and then you get the purl effect. We did the stomach part. We now have to knit the front part and the back part up to the neck. That means we need to divide our knittings in two. In the top box you can see how many stitches you need on each needle to have your work divided in two. We have been knitting all the way through to the armpit, divided the knitting project in two. We now need to decrease the stitches on each side of the needle. You can see how many rows you need to do that for in the bottom. Here you have 2 stitches that needs to be decreased. This is done in a purl. So you take 2 stitches onto the needle, do a purl. Remember you have to do that on both sides of the needle in the amount of rows that fitting the size you're knitting. You can now see what we did. We divided the knitting project in two. We still need to do the other side here. But what we did was knit it up to the edge of the neck. We need to do a rib edge now. Remember you still have to decrease a stitch on each side of the needle on every other needle. You need to knit 6 rows of rib, which is 1 knit and 1 purl. Here is how you decrease a stitch. We're going to do it in a purl, so you take 2 stitches onto the needle, do a purl stitch, and then take it off the needle, like so. Then you decreased a stitch. Now you can see the rib edge. We're done with the first part of the front or the back of the body part of the sweater. So you have to cast off the stitches on the rib edge, and then you have to knit the same part but on the other needle. Here's how you cast off stitches. You're going to keep the pattern, and then you do knitting 2 stitches onto the needle, and then you take the back stitch and turn it over the front stitch. You do the same again, knit 1 more, and then to take the back stitch over the first stitch. You continue like so until you cast off all stitches of your needles. We're about to knit the sleeves. In the text box you can see how many stitches you need to cast to make the sleeve. We're knitting from the wrist to the neck. Just like in the bottom of the sweater, you need to knit a rib edge, which is 1 knit, 1 purl for 12 rows. We're now done the rib edge of the sleeve. We need to do the purl knitting for the base of the arm. In the textbook you can see how many rows you need to do in purl. As you can see in a moment, we have knitted the base of the arm. We need to increase a stitch on each side of the needle and then knit 9 rows. Continue that until you have 10 extra stitches. Mark the rows you have knitted 2 extra stitches up on, because it is really difficult to control where you came from and how many rows you have left. Here is how you increase a stitch. You find a little loop in the edge and then you make a knit. You have now increased a stitch. It can be difficult to find the proper loop. You don't want to do it in a stitch. So take your time, be patient. Remember to put little markers on the rows you increase stitches on. It can be so difficult to figure out when and where you did it, so remember to put a little mark and then you can always count back. Remember to keep the purl pattern. Remember, you also have to increase on the other side of the needle. Here. We knitted all the way to the armpit. We now need to decrease stitches on each side of the needle on every other needle. You need to do that in the amount of rows depending on what size you are knitting. You have to decrease a stitch on each side of the needle, just as we did on the sweater. Remember to keep the purl pattern. So here you need to knit, and you need to knit 2 on the needle and do a normal knit, and then you decreased a stitch. Remember, you have to decrease a stitch on both sides of the needle, so you also have to do it on the other side of the needle. Just like earlier, remember to mark the rows that you decreased or increased stitches. It is so easy to get lost in the rows and the stitches, so remember, it's always good to have something to count back on. We need to knit the final thing, which is the rib edge. But before we do that, I just want to show you what we've done so far. So we done the wrist, the rib edge in the wrist. Then we knit it all the way through the armpit, which is there. And then from the armpit to the neck. And then the final thing we need to do is the rib edge. For the knit edge, we need to knit one purl, one knit, or one knit, one purl. And then you need to do that for 6 rows. We need to do the final thing on the sleeve, which is casting off the stitches. Remember, we have to knit 2 sleeves, so you need to go back if you can't remember everything. And then do the second sleeve. When you cast off, you have to have 2 stitches on your needle, and then you have to take the back stitch off over the first stitch, and then you cast it over. So we knitted 2 sleeves and 1 body. Now we need to assemble the sleeves. You can do that by knitting or sewing or even crocheting it together. It really does depend on what kind of technique you like to work with. So you need to assemble it from the wrist and all the way through to the armpit. And this is the armpit. The rest here we leave open so we can assemble it to the body of the sweater. This time I chose to crochet it together, which is a nice detail also, but it could be sewing, it could be knitting, it could be many things. The part we left open, we now need to assemble to the body of the sweater. We already assembled 1 sleeves on the sweater. As you can see here, the first sleeve is already assembled to the body of the sweater. This is the other side where the second sleeve is going to be assembled. So this is how the sleeve is supposed to be assembled to the body. When you're done with assembling the final sleeve to the body, remember to sew in loose ends and then your sweater is done. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you soon, and do remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more free knitting videos. We're about to assemble the knitting projects, which is the sleeves. First we're gonna assemble the sleeves, and then we're gonna assemble the sleeve to the body. It is very different how you assemble some crochet it together, some sew it together, some even knit it together. It does not matter what you choose to do, just as long as you're comfortable with the technique. So you're gonna assemble it from the wrist all the way through to the armpit part, which is shown in just a few minutes, all the way through up to the middle of the arm here also, and up to the armpit part. Leave the rest open because we're going to assemble that to the body of the knitting project. Now we're going to assemble the sleeve to the body, which it can, as I said before, you can crochet it together, you can knit it together, you can sew it together. There's possibly even more ways to do it that I don't know of, but you do what you are most comfortable with. As you can see, we already assembled one of the sleeves, and we need to assemble the last sleeve to the body. We hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to sew up loose ends, and then thank you for watching.